Every great fighter has two records. There is the one everyone knows: wins, losses, knockouts, championships. The names of the men standing across the ring when the lights were brightest. Then there is another record. It lives in a fighter's memory. It is made up of the opponents who changed the way he fought. The men who made him uncomfortable. The ones who forced him to think when instinct was telling him to attack. And sometimes it includes the fighters who made him wonder whether his best weapons were enough. Manny Pacquiao built one of the most remarkable careers in boxing history. He won world titles across 8 weight divisions. He fought champions from different generations and rarely stayed in one place for long. As his career grew, so did the list of men willing to test him. Some came with size, some came with speed, some came with power, and a few brought something harder to measure. They knew how to make Manny Pacquiao work for every inch of the ring. 3 men stand out for that reason. This is not a ranking of the 3 greatest fighters Pacquiao ever faced. It is about something more personal. The 3 baddest men he fought. Number 3. Marco Antonio Barrera. When Barrera stepped into the Alamodome in San Antonio in November 2003, he was already a major name in boxing. He had built his reputation the hard way. He had fought other top Mexican fighters, won world championships, and developed the kind of experience that only comes from years of high-level competition. Pacquiao was entering a different stage of his career. He was already a world champion, but the American boxing audience had not yet seen the fighter he would become. That night changed that. Barrera was supposed to be the more established man. He had the experience. He knew how to deal with pressure. He had spent years learning how to survive when an opponent refused to give him an easy round. But Pacquiao brought a problem Barrera had difficulty solving: speed, not just fast hands. Pacquiao could close distance quickly, attack from angles, and follow one punch with another before his opponent had fully recovered from the first. The first round showed that Barrera was not going to simply give up his position. He even put Pacquiao on the canvas early, although the referee ruled it a knockdown when it was actually a slip. Pacquiao recovered and began taking control. In the third round, he dropped Barrera with a straight left. From there, the fight became a test of whether Barrera could slow down a younger, faster opponent who seemed to be getting more comfortable with every minute. Barrera kept trying. He looked for openings. He tried to bring the fight back into his kind of contest. But Pacquiao's movement and combinations kept making that difficult. By the championship rounds, Pacquiao had taken over. In the 11th, he dropped Barrera again and then trapped him against the ropes with a series of unanswered punches. Barrera's corner stopped the fight. Pacquiao had just beaten one of the most respected fighters of his generation by 11th round TKO. The victory did more than add another name to his record. It announced that Pacquiao belonged among the elite. But Barrera's place on this list is not based on the fact that he nearly won. He did not. His importance comes from what he represented. He was the experienced champion standing in front of a rising fighter who had not yet proved that his speed could carry him through the highest level. Pacquiao answered that question. He beat Barrera decisively. But the next man gave Pacquiao a problem that could not be solved simply by throwing faster punches. Juan Manuel Marquez. Number 2. Their first fight came only 6 months after Pacquiao's victory over Barrera. By then, Pacquiao's reputation had changed. He was no longer an interesting young challenger. He was a serious threat. Marquez understood that. And unlike many fighters who faced Pacquiao, he found out very early just how dangerous that threat could be. The opening round was chaos. Pacquiao knocked Marquez down 3 times. 3 knockdowns in one round usually tell you where a fight is going. This one went somewhere else. Marquez got back up. Then he started solving the problem. Instead of rushing into another exchange, he began watching Pacquiao's movements. He looked for patterns. He paid attention to the moments when Pacquiao committed to a combination. Little by little, Marquez began finding his timing. That was the turning point. Pacquiao still had the faster attack, but Marquez was becoming better at predicting where that attack would come from. The fight became a battle between 2 very different ideas. Pacquiao wanted to create openings through movement and combinations. Marquez wanted to wait for those openings and punish him for creating them. The man who had been dropped 3 times in the first round was now standing in the middle of the ring and giving Pacquiao a real fight. By the final bell, the early knockdowns were no longer enough to settle the story. The judges ruled it a split draw. Pacquiao had started the fight with 3 knockdowns. Marquez had finished it by taking away much of the panic those knockdowns had created. That was what made him different. He did not need to overpower Pacquiao. He needed to understand him. And that ability became even more important when they met again. Their rivalry would eventually stretch across 4 fights, with every meeting adding another chapter to one of boxing's most memorable rivalries. Espen describes their first meeting as the beginning of a 4-fight series, with Marquez battling back after those 3 first-round knockdowns. For Pacquiao, Marquez was not simply another difficult opponent. He was a fighter who could make him pay for rushing. A fighter who could turn Pacquiao's greatest strength into a question. When do you attack? When do you wait? And what happens if the man in front of you already knows what you are about to do? That was the challenge Marquez brought. Barrera had shown Pacquiao that he could break through an experienced champion. Marquez showed him that some opponents could study his style and fight back with a plan of their own. But there was one more name, and this man presented a completely different problem. He was not simply trying to survive Pacquiao's speed. He was not waiting for Pacquiao to make one mistake. He believed he could stand with Pacquiao, control the pace, and make the younger fighter fight on terms he did not choose, and he had something else going for him. He had already proven himself against the best. When Manny Pacquiao stepped into the ring with him in 2005, the result would be the first major loss of Pacquiao's career in 6 years. His name was Erik Morales, and what happened that night would become much more important than a single loss on a record. Number 1. Erik Morales. By the time Manny Pacquiao walked into the ring with Morales in March 2005, he was no longer an unknown fighter trying to prove he belonged. The win over Marco Antonio Barrera had changed that. Pacquiao was becoming a major name. His speed was becoming one of the biggest problems in boxing, and his left hand had already caused serious damage to opponents who could not find a way around it. But Erik Morales was not impressed by the noise around Pacquiao. Morales had built his own reputation over years of hard fights. He had fought other elite champions, handled pressure, and learned how to stay calm when a fight became uncomfortable. This was not going to be a simple test of Pacquiao's speed. Morales wanted to make him fight at a different pace, and from the opening bell, that plan was clear. Pacquiao came forward looking for the openings he normally created with movement and combinations. Morales did not simply back away, he stood his ground. He used his reach, timing, and experience to keep Pacquiao from getting the kind of clean rhythm he wanted. When Pacquiao attacked, Morales answered. When Pacquiao tried to close the distance, Morales made him work for it. That mattered, because Pacquiao's greatest strength had always been his ability to make opponents react. Against Morales, Pacquiao was being asked to react too. The fight developed into a much closer contest than many expected. Pacquiao still had moments when his speed took over. He landed clean shots and showed the explosiveness that had made him such a difficult opponent. But Morales stayed composed. He did not panic when Pacquiao landed. He did not abandon his plan when the pressure increased. Instead, he kept giving Pacquiao another problem to solve. And by the later rounds, that problem had become very clear. Pacquiao could not simply overwhelm him. For perhaps the first time in his career, Pacquiao was facing a fighter who could match his confidence with experience and his aggression with control. Then came the final bell. 12 rounds were complete. The judges gave Morales the unanimous decision. Manny Pacquiao had lost. That result was important, but the scorecards were not the part that made this fight special. The real significance was what Morales had forced Pacquiao to discover. Speed alone could not solve every opponent. Power could not erase every problem. And sometimes, the fighter standing in front of you would refuse to give you the fight you wanted. Morales had shown Pacquiao that. But there was still another question. What would Pacquiao do with the lesson? Some fighters lose a major fight and spend the rest of their careers trying to avoid the same kind of problem. Pacquiao did something else. He came back. When the two men met again in January 2006, Pacquiao was a more experienced fighter. He had already lived through the first fight. He knew what Morales could do. He knew how Morales controlled distance, how he responded to pressure, and where Pacquiao had struggled the first time. The second fight felt different. Pacquiao was sharper. His attacks came with greater purpose, and he was better prepared for the moments when Morales tried to take control. This time, Pacquiao found the answer. In the 10th round, he stopped Morales. The man who had once been able to keep Pacquiao from fighting his preferred fight was now being overwhelmed by the version of Pacquiao that had learned from that defeat. But the rivalry was still not finished. Later that same year, the two met for a third time. By then, the balance had shifted. The first fight had belonged to Morales. The second had shown Pacquiao's ability to adapt. The third would show just how far that adaptation had gone. Pacquiao did not allow the fight to develop into another long tactical battle. He attacked from the opening moments and never allowed Morales to settle. The result came quickly. Pacquiao stopped Morales in the third round. 3 fights, 3 very different chapters. First, Morales proved he could beat Pacquiao. Then Pacquiao proved he could learn from Morales. Finally, Pacquiao showed that he had grown beyond the fighter Morales had beaten the first time. That is why Morales belongs at number 1. Not because he was the only man who ever gave Pacquiao a difficult night. He was not. Pacquiao would go on to face Juan Manuel Marquez again. He would fight Oscar De La Hoya, Miguel Cotto, Antonio Margarito, Shane Mosley, Timothy Bradley, Floyd Mayweather, and many other elite opponents. But Morales did something that made his place different. He forced Pacquiao to confront a weakness. While Pacquiao was still developing into the fighter the world would eventually know. The loss came before the championships, the massive pay-per-view events, and the later years when Pacquiao had already become a global superstar. Morales met him while the story was still being written, and he changed the direction of that story. That is what makes a fighter truly dangerous. It is not always about the hardest punch. It is not always about the fastest hands. Sometimes the greatest danger is the opponent who teaches you that your current version is not good enough. Morales was that opponent for Pacquiao, and the lesson stayed with him. Look back at the 3 names on this list, and each one represents something different. Marco Antonio Barrera was the established champion Pacquiao had to overcome to prove that he belonged at the highest level. Juan Manuel Marquez was the intelligent counterpuncher who refused to disappear after being dropped 3 times and found ways to challenge Pacquiao's attack again and again. Erik Morales was the man who stopped him, but more importantly, Morales was the man Pacquiao eventually learned from. That difference matters. A loss can remain nothing more than a mark beside your name, or it can become part of the reason you become better. For Pacquiao, the Morales defeat became part of the second story. After their trilogy ended, Pacquiao's career continued to grow. He moved through more weight classes, won more championships, and faced some of the biggest names in boxing. The fighter who had lost to Morales was not the same fighter who later walked into those enormous fights. That is the part of the story that makes this list more than a ranking. These 3 men did not simply test Pacquiao in the same way. Barrera tested whether the young southpaw could break through an established champion. Marquez tested whether Pacquiao could deal with a man who could read his attacks and answer them. Morales tested whether Pacquiao could rebuild after being beaten, and Pacquiao answered all 3 questions. He beat Barrera, he fought Marquez 4 times, and after losing to Morales, he came back and won the next 2. That is the strange thing about boxing. Sometimes the opponent who hurts your record the most can also become one of the most important people in your career. Morales gave Pacquiao something that a comfortable victory never could. A reason to change, a reason to improve, a reason to come back better. So when we talk about the 3 baddest men Manny Pacquiao ever fought, these names make sense for 3 very different reasons. Barrera represented the mountain Pacquiao had to climb. Marquez represented the puzzle he could never solve easily. Morales represented the first wall he could not break through. And perhaps that is why Morales belongs at number 1, because the hardest opponent is not always the man who makes you suffer for 12 rounds. Sometimes it is the man who changes you after the fight is over. Erik Morales did that to Manny Pacquiao, and Pacquiao's career after that night became part of the answer.